Hello everyone. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification course. Everyone in the auditorium can be seated. Welcome all of those of you that are watching online from many different countries. Thank you for joining us once again. Once again, spread the message always about these books, how they're available. And once again, we got some comments last week. People didn't know that I already have the books, that once they download the PDFs, they can search these things. And if you're a teacher and you're really striving to be a teacher, you'll find out very quickly it's impossible to remember what's on every page. But the information is really important. And if you download these to your computer, or I have them on my smartphone. Actually, I have them in files and I can search the text. So if I need to find a subject, or if I need to find a certain thing that's in a certain book, it makes it a lot easier to be able to search those texts. So download those PDF books that are there for you free of charge on Facebook. You can put them on your cell phone even, and they'll help you drastically when you're putting together your lesson plans. It's a little bit different than the way we're teaching it here. We're pretty much teaching how the book should be taught, along with bringing in some other information. A lot of it is because some of the information in the books, these books were written 20 plus years ago, but the information in them is just as valuable, if not more valuable, than it was 20 years ago because of society and the direction of society. But the examples and the information, we're going to have an article tonight that we're going to go in. That we had a brief article that we put into this book, but we're going to read a lot more behind it, and hopefully everyone kind of sees more into situations and what's taking place, and that way we don't always see the cover of a book and think, oh, that's got to be bad, or oh, that's got to be great. Just look at it. We want to be able to dig much deeper inside to see what really takes place, what's really going on. And of course, things start exposing themselves, and you can actually learn more about a situation. But download those books, and the responsibility unit will be up in just probably about another month, because it won't be long, and we'll be in that book also. That's the next book we'll be going into. And if you go online and download them, you'll have all 5 of the junior high series. But if you could be turning over in your respect units, we're still in chapter 5. We're going to be turning over to lesson plan 5, page E. And once again, those pages are only found in the teacher's manuals. So you want to make sure if you buy a book, you buy the teacher's manual. If you need the student's PDF, if you'll email us or send us a message, we'll send you the student's PDF. I know there's a lot of schools overseas using our books, and they want to use the student's PDF because they're putting them on a screen. And of course, you don't want the answers for the students just to read them off. You want to kind of get them thinking. And if all they're doing is looking at the teacher's manual, well, they're just going to read you the answers out of the teacher's manual. But you want to get them to thinking to see what they're retaining. So we're turning over to LP, or Lesson Plan 5, page E. And if you look in the center, we finished pretty much Procedure 8. If you look in the center of that procedure, it says found on page 133 to 136, and you'll see instruct students to read the article Bullying in School. And that's where we're going to be tonight. We're going to do a little bit of rehearsal about humility, and then we're going to jump straight into this bullying in school. And we're going to discuss it. Since this took place in 1996, this article that we're reading about, there's a lot more information that's come out since then, and we can take a lot deeper look at what has taken place and what really actually took place in this situation, and how there was a lot more going on behind the scenes than what you would think was going on. So it says, once again, we're going to read the article, Bullying in Schools, and discuss the answers to the questions as a class. Stress that failure to appropriately handle the disrespect of a bully can lead to the loss of life. Then have students read the section entitled Putting It All Together, found on pages 137 through 138 in their handbooks, and complete the accompanying exercise. And once again, for variation, the scenarios can be role-played and discussed as a class. So looking back over here to page 135, we left off with talking about humility, and we were taking a closer look at humility. And we're just going to read this very short paragraph. We're going to read it one more time to get it kind of set into our mind. Because remember, humility is something that is displayed through actions. A humble person doesn't go around bragging about how humble they are. Now, that's shown through their actions, is how you actually can see the humility in a person. And of course, One of the greatest signs of humility can become whenever someone corrects you and you accept the correction. You're doing something you thought was right. Someone points out you need to do something because it's going the wrong direction, it's wrong. That can be one of the greatest challenges of displaying humility. But if we readily accept, especially when it comes from a trusted authority and someone who is in the position to be able to do that, then you truly want to consider what's being said. But once again, here on page 135, let's take a closer look at humility. It says, humility is a positive character trait. A humble person has the ability to sacrifice being right in order to avoid a confrontation. Being humble should never be confused with allowing a bully to take advantage of you, or with being weak. So a humble person is actually a very strong person, especially mentally. It takes a very mentally strong person to use the character trait or put the character trait of humility into action. It takes self-control to stop and consider the best and most effective way to handle a situation. Some situations can be dangerous if you do not respond carefully. In order to prevent making the situation worse, you might need to be humble, apologize, and even walk away. So notice self-control is a must. It's the very basic foundation of all positive character, as we discussed in the self-control unit on page 6. And we need to always remind ourselves that the self-control that's where everything is really built upon. If we can't control ourselves, because that's what self-control is, controlling ourselves, if we can't control ourselves, then someone else is going to have to try to do that job for us. And we probably are not going to like it when someone else has to step in to try to get us to not be as foolish or as crazy or ignorant or whatever word you want to throw in there. And every time I used to talk to my dad when I was younger growing up, and he would tell me, because I remember when I was 16, I knew everything. I mean, I had the smartest teachers in the world, I guess, when I was 16, because I knew everything. And my dad told me one time, he said, when you're 20, you're going to see how ignorant you are. And I thought, boy, that's kind of harsh. And he goes, and then when you're 30, you're going to see how ignorant you were at 20. And then when you're 40, you're going to see how ignorant you were at 30. And then, of course, now I'm 50, and I see how ignorant I was at 40. I mean, he was right, because life evolves with education and learning. And there's a lot of things that we can do or directions we can go. And hindsight is 20/20, as we covered. There's a lot of things you'd like to go back and do over. You don't get the opportunity to do them over. And it doesn't mean that things turned out bad. It's just you see a better way you could have done something. And that's something that never seems to stop. There's always something that will help and guide. I remember when I was 19 years old, I had a fire in an apartment that I was renting. It was a townhouse. And we lost everything we had in the fire. And after the fire, someone said, "I sure hope you had renter's insurance." And I looked at them, I said, "What's renter's insurance? I've never heard of that before in my life." I would like to have had renter's insurance at that time. I never heard of it. Didn't even know what it was. No one had ever said that to me. And I was kind of surprised, because at 16, I was the smartest person I knew, but yet I didn't even have the basic common sense to have renter's insurance. I come to find out that I wasn't as smart as I thought I was, and I still learn that every day. I don't have that attitude anymore, I hope. I pray, that I start developing the character trait of humility. Well, here on page 136, this is a very interesting story to read. We've used this in a lot of schools. This was very popular because it was referenced back in 1996 to a song that had come out by a very popular group that was supposed to be something that influenced this young man and what he did. But when you look into the history of this young man's life, there was so much going on in this young man's life. It's not shocking that he fell victim to what he did. And he didn't just have one thing going on in his life that was really difficult to deal with. He had many things going on in his life that was difficult to deal with. So let's take a look, and before we read it, if you go ahead and put the first slide up, you can put a face with the story. That is Barry, and his name is pronounced Lukaitis. That is him. That was him after He was 14 years old when he did this, soon to be 15, but he was 14 years old. And if you can move to the next slide, that is the last picture that was taken of him when he had his sentence reduced in 2017. And this is in Washington State, is where he is in prison. So we're going to read the story, and then we're going to give some background information. We're going to read the story, answer the 2 questions, and then we're going to give some background information so you can see more into what took place. But here with the story, it says, 2 years ago, Barry Lukaitis, a junior high student in Moses Lake, Washington, walked into his algebra classroom carrying a high-powered rifle under a trench coat. He pointed the gun at a student sitting near the door and pulled the trigger. The boy died instantly. During the next 15 minutes, he shot 2 more classmates and his teacher. Only 1 victim survived the attack. The first student he killed, Manuel Vela, Jr., was popular, athletic, and had often bullied him. So the very first person he shot was the one who he felt had bullied him. Lukaitis' name was listed on the honor roll before he brought national attention to his small town. His classmates described him as a shy, serious loner, someone with few friends, who was a much-used target for harassment. According to students, his outsized feet, his gangly build, and his studious and his cowboy clothing were attributes that made him ripe for bullying. Ronald Stevens, executive director of the National School Safety Center, said, "As we look at the profile of perpetrators, the majority were first victims. When spurned, rejected, or bullied, some adolescents resort to violence. They want to resort to violence. They want to resolve their problems quickly with a measure of finality that is oftentimes rather scary. A rash of shootings at schools show that an alarming number of students use violence as a panacea for the difficulties riddling their lives. Lukaitis was no exception. Many researchers agree that decreasing social violence lies in the prevention of bullying behavior." So thinking about what took place there, you want to have a discussion with your students. And I encourage every teacher that goes through, especially this and other articles, get some information. Go back and reread the stories. Because there's a lot more information than what was just told right here. Right here you see that there's a young man who was being bullied. People acknowledged that he was being bullied because he looked a little strange. He didn't have many friends. He was a loner. And in his mind, he wanted to come in and take care of the bully. The unique thing about this school shooting was this is one of the very few school shootings you read about where the person who was considered the bully actually got shot. In Columbine and other very well-known school shootings, the people that were suspected bullies didn't even get shot. It was a lot of other people that got shot. Well, in this situation, Manuel Vela, he got shot, and he was the one that was supposed to be the bully, but other people also got shot who were not considered to be the bully. Even a teacher got shot. So get some background information. Get more information. There's a lot out there, and you'll see once we get into this. But here's the first question. How do you think Barry's choice has affected his life and the life of his family? Well, one thing you don't know about that story is what was his family life really like? So how do you think that affected the life of his family? Well, people are going to answer this question from what they've just read out of that story right there. And of course, answers will vary, but might include his family will most likely blame themselves. They will also feel guilt. Barry will have to live with the guilt and pain of his decision for the rest of his life. He will also probably go to prison. You know, he was sentenced to 205 years in prison for the actions he took that day. But since he was 14 years old, the U.S. Supreme Court reduced his sentence to 189 years. Now, what difference does that make for a human being? It doesn't really make too much sense, does it? But yes, I'm sure it affected his family. It affected his mom, his dad. But would you be shocked to learn that he actually saved a life before he did this? He actually talked someone out of committing suicide. Number 2, How do you think his choice affected the lives of his victims' families? And of course, answers will vary, but might include the victims' families will never see their loved ones again and might suffer hurt or depression. They might be devastated and angry. And I think all of those would be true. You can only imagine sending your child to school, especially if you're a parent and you find out your child was bullying someone, but that's the first time you learn your child was bullying someone, is the day they got shot for bullying someone. As a parent, you would, even if your child's the one doing the bullying, you would want to know so you can do something to put a stop to it, so you can be of assistance, so you can be of help. And in this young man's situation, that might have been the only help that was available as a parent. His school teachers could have probably done something if they were given the opportunity, but they had to be given the opportunity first. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. These are some articles that I pulled that show more information about what took place that day. It says, now this is specifically about Barry Lukaitis, it's his life, and this is off of Wikipedia, and it's also off Wikipedia for murderers. There's actually a Wikipedia that gives the life about people who committed popular, or they say well-known murders. In the year prior to the shooting, the Lukaitis family was in a dysfunctional state dealing with multiple issues. Lukaitis' parents separated in 1995, so the year before he committed this act, they separated, after his mother discovered her husband was having an affair. She filed for a divorce against her husband in January of 1996. This is the year that he actually committed the shooting. His mother, Joanne Phillips, was a domineering woman who became increasingly distant and began speaking of suicide. She would frequently imply that her son Barry would also have to kill himself, and that the date of the double suicide would be on Valentine's Day of 1996. Barry talked his mother out of doing so by having her write down her feelings. And these things have actually been documented as true. To go back and check to see, that situation actually took place, and he actually talked his mother out of that. Of course, she was trying to get him to do it also, and this was supposed to be her way of getting back at the husband who had the affair. Now, going over to the next slide, here's some more information about this young man. Lukaitis was born to Terry Lukaitis and Joanne Phillips. He spent the early part of his life in Iowa and Minnesota and moved to Washington in the 5th grade. His parents owned and operated a sandwich and ice cream shop in Moses Lake. Well, knowing they got a divorce and they separated, you can only imagine how that also affected the family business. Years before the shooting, his father began having an affair and his mother became increasingly distant and often spoke of suicide. She frequently implied that Barry would also have to kill himself. In January of 1996, she informed Barry the date of the double suicide would be Valentine's Day. However, it is widely believed, and he himself claimed, that the relentless bullying at the school impelled him to the murderous rampage. He also suffered from clinical depression, which was also present in the last 4 generations of the Lukaitis and Phillips families. He claimed to have been inspired by the music video Jeremy by Pearl Jam, which, of course, Jeremy supposedly takes his life. It was a very popular song back in the 90s. I remember it very well. But you look here, you have a young man. I didn't include, but you can go online and read more. He was diagnosed with clinical depression, and he was also on the drug called Ritalin at the time. So think about all of these problems going on in a 14-year-old's life. And you have, your parents have split up. They had a family business. You can only imagine what it did to the family business. And then your mom is telling you on Valentine's Day that we're going to commit suicide together. Now think about, here's the child helping the mom when the mom was supposed to be helping the child. And with all of that going on in his life, he's also being bullied at school. Now, when he went in and he shot, the first person he shot, Manuel Vela, who was supposed to be the bully, and then he also shot his algebra teacher and killed her and another student, but he shot other people. And he was also charged with kidnapping in the school because he had the firearm and refused to let him leave. This young man, in one day, in a matter of 15, 20 minutes, lost his life to where he's in prison. He's going to die in prison. And this is a question that I pose to everyone here, and I'm not trying to defend what this young man did. What he did was very wrong. loss of life, and of course the brutality of what took place should never be allowed. But all of the people that were there to sentence him, to try him, to accuse him, to tell him how bad he was, where were all of those people when he needed help the most? Think of all of the money that was spent for his trial, all the money that was spent as the jury comes in, the judge, the prosecutor, the facilities. And then, of course, he's sitting in jail as he's going through trial. And then after trial, he goes to prison. And think about what it's going to cost to keep him 3 meals a day, provide for him for the rest of his life. He's sentenced to, I very seriously doubt he's going to get paroled at 190 years. So that's going to be an expense for a lifetime. Think about all the enormous amount of money that's going to be poured in to incarcerating him. But in the 14 years he needed people, not one penny was offered. Some Ritalin, diagnosed him as being clinically depressed, but where was the help at that time? And that's really what the peaceful solution is all about, is identifying how to prevent these things from taking place and acknowledging when these things take place, putting somebody, just taking that young man and putting him in jail, that didn't fix the situation or the problem. We still have school shootings. That was in '96. Columbine was after this. It didn't stop school shootings, and it hasn't. I mean, just look at yesterday. Shootings in Washington, D.C., shootings in Philadelphia, shooting in Dallas-Fort Worth. You know, even a situation where it's very seldom you see an article where Lowe's and Home Depot are mentioned in the same article. But an article where a young man breaks into a Lowe's, steals a forklift, drives it down the road into the Home Depot parking lot where he rams a car where there's a lady sleeping in her car. She gets out of her car and takes off running. So his idea is to run her over with a forklift. And then when they find her, she's under the forklift. He left it on top of her. Killed her. Now, these are some very psychotic situations taking place. And you think we would look back and say, we're not really getting it right. There's something broken here. If we want to make a change in people, it's too late to make the change after they've committed the crime if you want to save lives before that. Can people still be helped? Absolutely. But why does someone have to lose their life? And why does someone have to be sentenced and be slandered in the news media before anyone cares to help? It's a shame. It's a failure of a society. And remember, we talked about what a society is in the ripple effect, chapter 5 of the character unit. And it's supposed to be governed by a body of rules. And that body of rules cannot start being applied once someone breaks them. They have to be taught first. How can you adhere to a rule unless you even know what it is? You know, and a lot of people will say, oh, I know what they are. You know, go down to your local municipal court and look at the laws that govern you as a citizen. You'll be shocked when you see books like this high and there's multiple books. You know, you don't realize how many ways you've broke the law until you do something that's inappropriate and they start charging you. And you start learning a lot about the law. The law, if the law, these moral principles were taught, could it have stopped this? A young man that took the life of 3 people talked his own mom out of committing suicide when she was the one that was supposed to be helping him. He had to help her. It showed that he had things in him that were positive that could have been beneficial. Where was the person to help him? Well, he didn't get that. And it's very sad. But I would encourage everyone, when you read these articles, because some of these are fairly old, go back and get the information that goes behind them. We obviously cannot put everything in these books, but there's enough stuff there so you can understand there was more pieces to this puzzle than just someone pushed him, called him a name, did it for a couple months, and then he shot him. It's much deeper than that. Continuing on here on page 136 at the very bottom, it says, as you can see from the previous article, responding to bullies with disrespect is deadly and no one wins. And that's true regardless of what was going on in his life. What he did no one won. He went to prison, and the person he thought bullied him or did bully him died. Keep in mind that violence is never the answer. Now, I want you to think about that and I'm not trying to stir the boat here, but I want you to think about that when we see this. They went in and killed him, went in and killed the bullies, and went off to prison. But if he would have been 18 and we'd have sent him to Iraq and he would have shot somebody, he wouldn't have went to prison. So think about that. People who resort to violence as an option for dealing with bullies in effect become bullies themselves. Do not let this occur to you. You have the knowledge and the skills to find a peaceful solution. And that's something that we're being given, is this knowledge when we go through this curricula. And as we discussed in the last class, whenever we put those things into action, it's displayed as wisdom. Whenever we have the knowledge to do something and we put it into action in our lives, it shows that we have acquired wisdom. When we don't do it, it shows that we're still in that foolish state, so to speak. We're still needing some humility within our own lives. Looking over here to page 137, notice it says, putting it all together. Here's what you should do to respond appropriately to the disrespect of a bully. And the very first one is be willing to be humble and even walk away to avoid a confrontation. That's what we just read on page 135. Don't allow verbal abuse to progress to physical abuse. And that can be easier said than done, but it's something that can be accomplished. People can call you things. Here, in a day of social media, it used to be a phone call they'd call you something. Now, you'd think, well, they text something, but now they'll put it out for everyone to see. You can be accused, lied about, no matter what it is, and people don't know. And it can take you a couple days to get these things off the internet if someone says something about you. And then just imagine, once again, I'm not here to defend anybody's bad choices, but just imagine if you're a person that made a bad choice many years ago, and part of what society has done has said that when you come out of prison, now you have to register, and we're going to put your face everywhere. And the mistake or the bad choice you made, we're going to always tell people. When you move into a new neighborhood, we're going to send out flyers and tell them you just moved there and what you did 25 years ago. Now you think about what's being done to that person. And then you have to appear, you have to do this, you have to do that. It looks like when you do something like that, there's not much confidence in the judicial system, that there was no rehabilitation. Some people will say people can't be rehabilitated like that. But I know for a fact I've dealt with people who I know have changed their lives, who made bad choices like that. And I even know them to this day, and I know that they're a very different person. And I know that the reason they fell into that was because that's what they were taught to be when they were younger. No one helped them see life a different way. But we don't like to do that or admit that as a society. We want to put people down, whoever we can put down, so we can pick ourselves up. If that's not bullying, I don't know what is. If you make a mistake or a bad choice and you get out and now you have to register and let everyone see what you did, if we want to be fair about it, why don't we take everybody in that community and put out the worst thing they did so everybody can read about the worst thing everybody did? You'd find out a lot about people, very embarrassing things. You'd probably find a lot of people that did it and hadn't got caught yet too. But we don't do that. In a society, we can create what we call judicial justice, and it's nothing more, nothing less than bullying somebody, is all it is. And it doesn't stop the crime from being committed either. And that's a statistical fact. It doesn't stop it. But if we educate people, teach people how to make better choices, lead them into making better choices, start from a young age, help people that are being abused, because people that abuse others were once abused themselves, we can make a huge difference in what we're doing as a society. And look over to page 85 just to get this back in our minds, because we read this in chapter 4. It's called Respect in Society. And this is just to put this back in our minds. It says, if we lived in a society where everyone was respectful of others and their belongings, problems such as physical and verbal abuse, as well as crimes that involve theft and murder, would cease to exist. Think about it. A world where no one disrespects others and everyone interacts with concern and consideration for the next person. Impossible, you say? Well, not if everyone, notice this is the key. Not if everyone starts to develop a positive moral character. Well, how do you start to do that? It starts with education at the youngest of age. And we've already talked about how it's a scientific fact how a child can even learn from within the womb. It's never too young to start with these things. Continuing on, it said, notice in chapter 1, that was chapter 1 of the respect unit, you learned that all people deserve respect and that even strangers can demonstrate concern by treating each other with compassion. Did you know that when each individual makes the choice to interact with respect, there's a positive effect on our society? Every time a respectful interaction takes place, that helps build a stronger, more beneficial society. This can occur because we are interdependent with others. In other words, we rely on each other as we react, communicate, and go about our daily lives. It's something we can't escape. It's required of us. This young man was a loner, but he still couldn't escape having to be in the system of the school. Well, how do we measure whether we live in a society that values and promotes respectful conduct and interaction? Well, think about that. We discussed that when we were in chapter 4. How do we measure that? What behavior does our society consider as disrespectful? You'll find that some things that we do as a society that we consider justice is very disrespectful in itself. So looking back over, let's look over to page 94 also. And in page 94, we discussed exploring disrespect in society. And notice here at the very first paragraph, it says, sadly, disrespectful behavior has become a commonplace in our society. Whether you witness this behavior or notice on television, at the movies, at school, or in the mall, it is no longer surprising to see people dressed inappropriately, disrespecting authority figures, being rude, using vulgar language, using vulgar hand gestures and language. Let's take a closer look at the common ways people disrespect others in society. Notice the very first one here you have is violence and aggression. Violence and aggression can exist in two forms. We've talked about verbal and physical. And did you know that derogatory negative remarks about someone's skin color, nationality, or physical appearance, as well as threatening to hurt someone, are forms of verbal violence and abuse? Notice that's right. Words can be violent. If you don't have that underline it, circle it, highlight it, and then write chapter 2 of the character unit right beside of it, because that's where we initially started talking about the abuse and All in the Family, where it takes place and how things truly start with the ones that we're closest to, or the lack thereof. Whoever said words can't hurt was wrong. Words do hurt and can result in lifelong emotional scars. You know the old saying, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me. We talked about that in the acceptance unit. That's one of the biggest lies ever taught to our society. Words do hurt. They don't hurt when you're saying them, but when they're being said about you, they affect you mentally and physically, because you can feel it within yourself. Verbal threats and insults can leave victims feeling humiliated, scared, anxious, frustrated, or angry. In addition to this, verbal abuse is usually the precursor to physical aggression. To use physical force against someone with either a fist, a kick, or a weapon is one of the worst and most dangerous forms of disrespect. Violence and aggression contribute to our high crime rate and can range from pushing someone in the hallway at school to rape, assault with a deadly weapon, and murder, such as school shootings. And notice at the very bottom, violent behavior can be witnessed in many communities, in schools, and homes. Now, needless to say, those students that seen that shooting take place that day in the algebra class, I would think that it affected them greatly, and they'll never forget that. I could only imagine. I've seen people die, and I can remember everyone that I've seen die. And I don't have a long list, but I got a list that's long enough. And it always sticks in your mind, and you never forget it. And when you think about it, all of the feelings, and these can be different situations, all of the feelings that took place that day literally can come right back into your body, and you can feel what you felt when you seen life leaving a person, whether it be through a disease or a bad choice a person made, a car wreck, or even self-inflicted wounds. It's a very difficult thing to process sometimes, and it's a very sad situation. I just read an article, and I wanted to print it off, but I didn't get time, but anyone can search this on the internet, where a woman who just ended her life in Switzerland, she did assisted suicide, because after taking a COVID booster shot, it gave her a neurological illness that can't be cured, where she couldn't even breathe on her own. And she was asking people for help, and they finally said, there's nothing we can do for you. So her question was, why did no one warn me of the difficulties before I did this? I only did what I was instructed to do. And then after she did what she was instructed to do, after 2 years, she finally sought assisted suicide, and she took her life. I think it was yesterday, is what the article said. And this is a well-known person. I don't remember if they were a singer, a movie star, or something, but they're fairly well-known, and that's why the article is out there. If it had been a nobody, like you or I, never would have made the news most likely. But since they had some kind of standing, they got put in the news. But you think about it, that's just one example of what people are going through. We have a lot of people sitting in the auditorium, a lot of people watching online in many different countries. And sometimes people can feel like it's the country they lived in that bullies them. Some people live in countries that they feel like there's no hope. I know we have a lot of students and a lot of teachers right now in the country of Nigeria. And that country is in major turmoil. And the citizens and the people there, are just to survive from one day to the next has become an enormous challenge. And they'll tell you they don't know who their friend is. It feels like everybody in government is bullying them. And they're receiving it from every direction. So this is more than just school, and it's more than just punching someone. Words alone. In fact, for that article where we talked about Barry Lucaitis, he acknowledges in his court case that Manuel Vela never physically touched him. It was all verbal abuse. But it got to the point he said he could not deal with it any longer. But he says now that he would have never done what he did, because he realized he could have used other measures. He could have done other things. Sad part about it is he knows that because he's been told that now. But where were those people? 14 years old. That's 12 years out of diapers. That's not very old. And I don't mean that as insulting. I'm just saying we expect a lot from young people sometimes when we don't educate them. We're very unfair to them. If we educate them, they should make decisions based on what they've been taught. But if they've never been taught, it's like you dig a well, but you didn't get to the water, and you're mad because the water's not coming out, but you didn't get deep enough to get to the water. But you're still mad that it's not giving you water. It doesn't make sense. Or it's like you apply for a job and you get the job, and you're like, oh, when's payday? Oh, payday's next Thursday. And you show up next Thursday, I'm here to get my check. Well, you didn't show up to work. I didn't want to work, I just wanted a check. It makes about that much sense. You can only get out of something what you put into it. And that's what we're finding as a society. We're not putting enough into education, especially from youth up. There's not one person in society, though, I don't care how old they are, how young they are, I don't care what they've done, that cannot be helped, that cannot have a change made in their life. But they're going to want to have to do it too. The author of The Peaceful Solution said many times that the only way the peaceful solution won't work in your life is if you choose not to use it. That's it. If you choose to use it, it will work in anyone's life. But continuing on here on page 137, and this is the second piece of the puzzle, it says, do not be ashamed or embarrassed to talk to someone in authority about how you are being treated. If you don't speak up, no one will ever be able to help you. And that's very important. And it's also important for those who are in authority to actually actively listen. And sometimes, and I know it's not beyond the person to come up and say, so-and-so's being mean to me, and no one ever did anything to them. I know that's not beyond them too. I've got a lot of children. I know how that works. And I was a child myself one time with 2 brothers. Especially if you've seen the authority figure coming. To me, when we seen my grandmother coming, you started trying to think of excuses. But when she looked at you, you felt like she already knew what the truth was. You might as well give it up. There was no lying. She was going to tell it anyway. But we have to work through those things. We have to get through those things. You can't say, just grow up. He just called you this. You'll be okay. Sticks and stones don't break your bones, but words, they'll never hurt you. You have to consider the people that teach and say these things. You have to earn respect. How do they feel when these murders and suicides and deaths and rapes and all of these other things take place? How does that theory work? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. If it worked, then we would be teaching that also. The thing the Peaceful Solution has done through having so many teachers and parents, volunteers involved in the creating of this curricula was try to find a source, a plan, a formula that worked. And it truly does when it's implemented. Continuing to the next one, it says, tell your parents, guardians, and guidance counselor about the problem and why you are concerned. And do not stop telling until the problem is resolved in a peaceful way. So once again, if you go to someone and you're being bullied, someone is doing something to you, and you go to someone and you feel as though they're not helping you, go to someone else. Don't give up if someone doesn't help you. We have a practice in the Peaceful Solution that whenever there's a problem that arises, when we use guidance counselors or we have people that will listen to try to help, we always have 2 people present. That way you can actually have 2 people listen and 2 people try to work with that situation. Sometimes we'll have 3, 4, and 5. But we want to show that we want to help solve problems. And granted, it can be very difficult. It's a challenge. But the only way that anything ever gets solved, remember, communication, positive communication, is the foundation of respect. And if someone is being treated in an inappropriate way, the worst thing a person can do is think, no one's going to do anything anyway. Why should I say anything? Because you're pretty much setting in your mind that people look at you as lesser of value and that you're not worth what you're truly worth. And you can actually be your own worst enemy in that by thinking that you're really not worth the time and the effort to help and assist, because every human being is. Life in itself is very valuable. Continuing on, it says, encourage those in authority to contact the bully's parents and to notify them of his behavior. Once again, Manuel's parents, I tried to find if there was anything that showed when the bullying was reported or how it was dealt with, and I couldn't find any articles about that, which I thought was strange. It's like it was only known the day the young man was shot. And then after he was shot, all the students came forward and go, oh yeah, that's been going on for a while. Now, could you imagine where were those students at whenever this took place? Because there was another young man died that had nothing to do with this, and an algebra teacher. That could have been prevented if the students would have made a report. Hey, this boy over here is getting bullied. This guy's really being kind of hard on him, and this is one of the popular guys in school. Can you kind of get him to lay off with this guy? I think in schools now that we went to, a lot of students now will report bullying because of fear somebody's going to shoot school up. And we found out, we were in Laredo, Texas one time teaching in an elementary school. And we were talking about bullying. We were teaching this actual chapter. And it was part of the anti-bullying program they had in Laredo, Texas. And in that elementary school, after we taught a class, there was some students that were laughing and kind of joking about someone being hanged. Come to find out, the teacher came to us and said, yeah, there was a student here last year that committed suicide in the 4th grade. They hung themselves. And those students were laughing about it, like it was funny. Now, we didn't know about that before we came in, and of course it wouldn't change the curricula that we're going to teach and that we did teach, but it would have been nice to kind of know that in advance, and we did kind of come from a different perspective, because people that knew that young lady that did it, child actually, only 9 years old, I'm sure they looked at it very differently. But the school said that they actually were able to, and I thought this was, it was disappointing. The school was able to pretty much convince everyone that the child had moved away with her family to a new city. And the suicide was only considered a rumor. And no one had verified whether it really took place or not. But it really took place. But they fixed it, they thought, by trying to make it look like the family had moved away and the child was no longer in the city. But she said the parents did move away after the suicide, so that helped everything go right along. But it didn't fix the problem. And it didn't fix the situation. Of course, there's nothing you could do to bring the child back after that. So we have to deal with facts, and we have to deal with issues as they are. Sugarcoating and putting lipstick on a pig doesn't change anything. We have to make sure. You don't want to be like the man in India. That's a very popular story on the internet. He married this beautiful woman. They went home. She took off her makeup, and he immediately wanted a divorce. He said it's not the same woman that it was with makeup on. But in reality, yes, she's the same woman. Your expectations were a little bit too much, I guess. But these are things, and this is a true story, where people do those things. Well, if people would take the lipstick and the makeup off of some of these stories they make pretty and they get down to what it really is, probably wouldn't want to be in those situations. And that's why we need to deal with them for what they are. Continuing on, it says, don't pretend that being bullied is not a big deal, because it is a big deal. And it doesn't matter if it's someone in authority that is bullying you. That's a big deal. Don't think that, because we talk about these things, they take place in the workplace, they take place everywhere. If it's your supervisor, if it's someone that's in an authority role and they're bullying you, that's still a big deal. Could be even a bigger deal, especially if that's the person you feel you're supposed to go to. Go to someone else. Appeal to someone else. Never accept the fact that someone is bullying you. That should never take place. Continuing on, if you are physically assaulted, do not ignore it. Physical assault is against the law. You have the right to ask your parents, guardians, and school to pursue legal action. And that actually is the case ever since the case of Phoebe Prince in the northern part of the United States, northeastern part of the United States. It was turned into a crime. Students can actually be charged with assault and murder for people killing themselves if they were part of the cause to that. The very last one here is talk to counselors or trusted friend to vent your feelings. When it says a trusted friend, someone that can help you. Don't go find your buddy that you're going to find, well, let's go beat the hell out of this guy now. That's not what you should do. Don't go find your drinking buddy. Don't go find your guy, everybody likes to hang out and talk about how the day went, and let's talk about this guy or that guy. We're talking about finding a way to solve the issue. So when it says a trusted friend, that's a friend. Go back and read the 4 stages you go through to choose a friend. It's not somebody you just sit around and gossip with. It's somebody that you would look to that would give you the right direction to move forward. So deal with your primary emotions honestly and openly so that they do not progress into anger, hostile feelings that can, in turn, can lead to rage and violence. And remember, when it gets to rage and violence, that's uncontrolled anger. Anger in itself is a normal emotion, but when not dealt with properly, as chapter 3 of the self-control unit tells us, when it's not dealt with properly, it leads to worse things. It leads to negative behavior, such as rage and violence. Continuing on here, it says, a bully will continue to cause problems for others as long as they are able to. The sooner you pursue a peaceful solution to the problem, the sooner the bullying will stop. Going on to our next slide, I want to remind everyone, of course, once again, this is your choice. And this is from page 111 of the Self-Control Unit. And once again, and we've talked about this word courage a lot in Chapter 5 of the Respect Unit. And once again, this is being out of the Self-Control Unit, page 111. The choice is yours. It takes courage and strength of character to practice self-control when you are being deliberately provoked. Notice you must set your mind in advance to use positive communication and respond peacefully even when you are being antagonized. Once you have responded appropriately and found a peaceful solution, give yourself credit for having made the right choice to avoid a crisis situation. And then notice it's highlighted there. Let it go. You don't replay it over in your mind. You don't continually think about it. You don't think about, I should have did this and I should have did that. I should have got even with that blankety blank. No, let it go. Once it's dealt with a peaceful solution, let it go. Notice, don't replay the incident over and over in your mind. If the person who antagonized you caused you to feel embarrassed or afraid, then deal honestly with these emotions by talking about it with a friend or trusted adult. And that's a friend who can help you in the right direction. If you hold on to these emotions, you could begin to have negative thoughts about yourself and about the person you had conflicts with. This will cause you to feel frustrated and resentful. If you are not careful to guard your mind and your focus on the negative incident, you could seek to get revenge. And that's why it's so important. It's so important to make sure that once you've dealt with this appropriately, let it go. Just move on. Every day brings enough challenges. You don't need to create challenges or pull back in challenges from the day before. Turning over to page 138, there's two scenarios here we're going to read. And it says, read the following scenarios. And once again, these are scenarios you can role play also, as the procedure was talking about, if the class allows it to, with the numerous people you have in your class or the time allowance. Use the lines provided to briefly tell how you would handle the situation to arrive at a peaceful solution. Notice it didn't say start a war, it didn't say get back or plot revenge, but to use a peaceful solution. Here's a hint. Sometimes a solution might be as simple as being humble and walking away. And that's a great hint for the very first one. Number 1, it says, imagine being in school. 2 other students are standing in front of the water fountain. You say, excuse me, please. You expect them to say sure, then step aside to allow you to get a drink. To your surprise, they look at you as if you had just asked them to do backflips down the hallway. With shocked expressions that quickly turn to scowls, they stare at you as if you just crawled out from under a rock. One looks at you and says, get lost. The other one says, there's a water fountain on the next floor. Beat it. And you can see in the cartoon figures there down below the scowls on their face and the emotions going through. Even got the thumb, get out of here, get lost, go to the next floor for your drink of water. Well, what's a peaceful solution to that? And you really want to get your students to think about it. And of course, the hint helps a lot with that. But notice it says the answers will vary, but might include getting a drink of water is not worth fighting over. Just walk away and get your drink elsewhere. Also, tell an authority figure so that he can do something or she can do something about it. So walk away, but also report it. Don't just walk away. Report it also. It's very important that you report it. And then here the second one. For the 4th time that day, the school bully said something nasty about you. On your way into the lunchroom, he stuck his foot out as you walked by and tripped you. Everyone started laughing. Now, what is the peaceful solution to that? I can tell you, I seen this take place when I was in school. Not this particular scenario, but it was very close. When I first read this, it brought back to my mind when I was in high school. When I was in high school, the lunchroom, there were elevated areas that only the seniors could eat at. And sometimes they would come down and mingle with the common folk, which would be us juniors, sophomores, and freshmen. And one time there was a senior who wanted to bully. If you wanted to pick on somebody that was an under you, you had to come down with the common folk that were in grades 9, 10, or 11. And they did the very same thing. They tripped somebody, and their food went everywhere. And he turned around to smile back at the elevated area where all the seniors were sitting, but he didn't expect the person to take the food tray and literally take both hands and go up against his head as hard as he could go. And since the food tray didn't break, when the guy turned around, he did it again. And I don't know if you've ever seen a food tray hit a nose, but it looks like a bottle of ketchup exploding. Now, of course, I don't think that guy ever did that again. I've never seen that guy get picked on again, but that didn't fix the situation at all. It didn't make it better, but someone sitting on the outside would think, hey, this retaliation, it put a stop to this. It did put a stop to it, because I knew the guy that they were picking on, and he was in counseling for many months after that, trying to deal with it, because he wasn't a very violent person. He just snapped. And when he did, he said that he kind of shocked himself that he did it. That he was a lonely child, didn't have anybody to really fight with, but he just did it. Well, where did it come from? Well, we have a lot of things deeply rooted in our DNA that we don't know about. People often say, I had no idea I could do something like that. Whether it's negative or positive. It's kind of like, I always laugh at people that are scared of snakes. Scared to death of them, but never seen one in their life. I talk to people in other countries, and I always laugh. Because they think every snake's going to swallow somebody whole, or every snake's poisonous, and every snake's, if it bites you, you're going to die. And, there's so many things about it, and you think, man, these snakes, they get a pretty harsh reputation, and here they're just trying to live a life like everybody else. But you perceive things about people, and I would have never thought that guy would have done something like that, and I was kind of shocked when he did it, but I remember watching it, and everything was like in slow motion. It wasn't really fast, it was really slow. And I never seen so much blood shoot up in the air in my life when that food tray hit the nose, it broke the food tray. And those things are very hard plastic. I don't know what they use these days, but back then we used the old green plastic ones, and it broke, and it sounded like someone hitting a baseball when it broke. It was loud. But needless to say, they got in trouble for it, and they should have got in trouble for what they did. They shouldn't have done or retaliated that way. And sadly, at the time, bullying, when I was in school, that would have been in 1990. I was out of school in 91. 89 and 90, bullying was just considered part of life back then. There was no anti-bullying campaigns going on in school back then. Back then, it was the Just Say No campaign. That was the only campaign going on in schools. So bullying was considered just a normal part of the school curricula, so to speak. It took place every day. But here you see the answer for this could be, control your anger. Well, that young man that day, he didn't control his anger at all. It got away from him. And get help of an authority immediately. This is called physical assault. And an authority must take serious steps to ensure this behavior stops. And it's very degrading to see things like this take place, and it's something that shouldn't be allowed in society. But sadly, if we were to have a study to see how many children go through being physically assaulted in schools in this form or fashion, or verbally abused in schools, I think we'd still be shocked of how much is taking place, and of course how much teachers are done that way also. It's a sad thing that we've allowed this as a society to get out of hand. But the only way to fix something, if something is broke and you want to fix it, you have to return it back to what it was before you broke it. So you kind of have to put things in reverse and keep going backwards till you get at the very first point where things were going okay. And when you get at that point, you can start with education and you can actually fix situations. But you can't wait when something is broke and think, well, we'll just start from the broken point and move forward. It's still broke. And no matter what you do, it's always going to be broke. And eventually it's going to get worse. So think about that and consider how we can do this through education. So we're going to stop here on page 138. 139 will be finishing up procedure 8, and then they'll get into procedure 9 on page 140. So that'll be a great point for William to pick up on, and I'm sure he'll do some rehearsal of what we've covered so far today. Our next class is going to be this coming Sunday. It'll be July the 9th at 5:30. So we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you once again.